Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and for some of you, a very early morning. Welcome to Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Professor Joseph Mbele. He's a professor of English at St. Olaf College in Minnesota. He focuses on post-colonial literature. Our host this week, back in the big chair, is Sree Sreenivasan. My name is Neil Parekh. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please like, comment, share, retweet, do all the things you do on social media to make sure people know about this show. Thank you in particular to everyone watching on a replay. You're catching the very beginning of the show. We appreciate you taking the time to come back to this. If you've seen any of the promos for the show, oh my God, there's a lot to cover in this episode. I'm so glad Sree is back to cover this one. You saw the coverage, or you heard about for sure the what can only be called a debacle in the White House. Trump and Vance ganging up on Zelensky from Ukraine. We'll talk about that. USAID is being dismantled right in front of our eyes. We have a former read-along guest, Stephen Herman from Voice of America, has been put on administrative leave, which is just for a tweet that he sent out. It's crazy. And of course, Washington Post, and I didn't put this in the promos, but Jeff Bezos saying no more editorials that I don't agree with. I mean, what is going on? If that's not enough, apparently all 8 planets are in alignment this week. So we're going to get Sree to help us understand and make sense of some of this. But we have a great guest today, Professor Joseph Mbele, who is going to join us. A quick shout out to our sponsor, Muckrack. Thank you for all the support that you offer for the show. And we also want to acknowledge Digimentors, the consulting firm that Sree set up several years ago. I'm the vice president of events and communications. Digimentors produces the show along with other shows as well. We do digital marketing, strategic communications, training and workshops, staffing and recruiting, a lot of work on AI as well. So we wanted to make sure you knew about that. And Sree will talk about this, but his newsletter, this most recent newsletter, this was from last Monday, folks. The peril of kicking America's allies to the curb. Europe prepares to be abandoned by its biggest ally, press Ukraine's innovative tech. Sree wrote this 4 days before that Oval Office, craziness. He could have said the peril of kicking Ukraine to the curb. And that cartoon is 1945. We buried fascism. And in 2025, Trump and Vance are digging it back up. So we just have a lot to cover. Again, we are so glad that you're here with us today. We will welcome a few folks and then bring Sree on when he is ready. Jonathan is watching from the East Village. Jonathan, thank you very much. Our friend, former guest Kavri Madhavan is saying hello from Ireland. That international perspective is going to be important today, of course. Patricia Freudenberg saying greetings from New York. And my mom saying good morning from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. She is home. She got back yesterday after several months in Tampa. With that, let's bring on our host, Sree Sreenivasan. Sree, it's almost like you are a guest in your own show. Welcome back.
I was away.
Great.
Yeah. I was away most of January and February doing workshops and attending conferences, speaking around the world. And so now I'm really happy to be back. And you've done an amazing job with the shows in this new year. So I'm very happy to pick up where we left off. But so much going on, Neil. I wanted to show
Yeah.
everyone yesterday's New York Times headline, which was Trump and Vance scold Zelensky in blow up. So you called it debacle. Blow up is a good word, but debacle, I think, is the better word. Jettisoning Ukraine in favor of Russia. Visit abruptly ends, imperiling a deal for peace. And I've been doing interviews about the situation in the White House. I think it was badly handled, and the idea that this is where we are, starting with the conversation about the clothing and the suit that he was wearing, that why wasn't he wearing a business suit? That question, by the way, was asked by Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend. That's a really important context, that
Really?
right wing, he's right wing media, he's her boyfriend, and he asked this question, which everyone who knows anything about Ukraine knows, that he has said he be will not be wearing a suit as long as the war is on, in solidarity with his soldiers. So that became something that got so much attention. But at the heart of it, the only person pleased with what happened is Vladimir Putin, and that says something about where we are with the world. And as you said, in the newsletter, which everyone can get on Substack, sreenet.substack.com, sreenet.substack.com, or just Google Sree Sunday Note, we talked about why we have an obligation as America to protect Europe, to protect Ukraine. But beyond that, if this continues, then it gives a green light for China on Taiwan, for example, and lots of other issues. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about, but there is so much to cover. Let's just quickly go through the front page today. Today's front page here is how dinner party banter inspired federal takeover. After a crash course in civics, Musk built a team of aggressive young enforcers. So this is a fascinating story about what happened September 2023. Elon Musk went to dinner at the house of a Sri Lankan American tech bro named Chamat. And this was in a fundraiser for Vivek Ramaswamy. So you have those two South Asian, deplorable South Asians, and there he learned something badly about American civics and really decided that the primary objective of his life is going to be not Mars, not getting everyone to drive a Tesla, but getting for the federal government shrunk down. And we know that that was Vivek Ramaswamy's platform. And as we know, he didn't even make it to Inauguration Day as a co-chair of Doge, and is now running for the governor of Ohio. I think the people of Ohio would be very interested to know that Vivek Ramaswamy is to blame for a lot of what's happening with federal jobs being lost, the kind of chaos that's happening all over Washington. Let's see what else is on the front page here. Undoing years of climate policy in a few weeks, Trump's moves strain limits of his power, and allies blow up could intensify Putin's attacks. No kidding. Of course, that's going to happen. And as an Oscar an Oscar nominee rouses Brazil's junta victims, and a Warhol, a socialite, and a lone gone wrong is the headline there. And baggage and all, Cuomo jumps into a crowded race for mayor. Some of you will know, even if you're international folks, you would know that the governor of New York for a decade, Andrew Cuomo, the son of another governor, Mario Cuomo, was very active in the early days of the pandemic, somewhat confrontational with Donald Trump. And we all thought he was telling the truth in a way that Trump was not, but at the same time was having troubles with the spread of the disease in the old age homes where we lost a lot of people. And then he lost his job soon after because of allegations of sexual harassment that were brought by his own government against him, his own government, and so he resigned. But now he's coming back as tried to be successor to Eric Adams, who himself is in trouble, but has basically been pardoned, or not. The charges against him for corruption are not being pursued by the Trump administration. So it's all very interesting. And New York always has an oversized role to play, of course, in the US. So we have a lot to talk about. I want to just say that I saw Kaveri Madhavan at the Jaipur Literature Festival and met her for the first time. It was fantastic to see her, and a great friend of the show. Naomi is watching from a bitter cold Rhode Island. Wonderful topics and perfect timing. Ken Fisher is watching from Iowa. And by the way, we are not more than 2 years from all the craziness where the primaries in Iowa and other things are going to be in the news again. And Jonathan Borstein is watching. Bezos may want to turn the Post into his Twitter. Musk and he are rivals for government projects. That's the most irritating part of all of this, that people who are for free markets like him, like Musk, get billions of dollars of US government subsidies, but they want the free markets for everyone else. And Carol's watching from Tampa Bay. Apollo's watching from Philadelphia. Paula Kiger's in New York City. Hi, Paula. Usually she is watching from Florida. And Doug Levy is watching very early morning out in San Francisco, 5:40 in the morning. So thank you all for being here. And Pradnya Haldipur, good morning from the Hellscape. She is actually going to be on Neil's show later in the week, and so we are very excited to have her with us. She's going to be on March 13th, that's next Thursday, Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health, managing mental health while being effective at work. Such an important topic with everything that's going on. Even she characterized it as a hellscape. So everyone, make sure you tune in and follow Neil on all his platforms so you can see it.
And just to clarify, it'll be 2 weeks from next Thursday. Will be March 6th. We do the show the second and fourth Thursdays of the month. While we're talking about it, I'll just make a quick reference. Our last show, and I encourage you to watch. My colleague Don Helmrich was the guest, kind of like what we're doing here sometimes, Sree, where we switch back and forth. But Dawn was the guest, and I interviewed her. She shared her experience with losing, not having large portions of her memories from childhood, which is just incredible. The conversation with her, Sree, where she talks about high school friends of hers when they get together. Do you remember the time in freshman year when we did? And she draws a complete blank. There's a complete block, unfortunately. So that's something worth rewatching. Just think back to older friends. And not being able to recall. I was saying that like there are things I don't remember that I kind of have to be reminded of, but she has a complete blank for a lot of this.
It's
pretty incredible.
Very upsetting. Deborah Kerr is watching from Fort Lauderdale, and
Deborah was our guest.
Our guest, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say the week before we talked about her trip to Antarctica, so that was really great as well.
And she says that she just unpacked her New York Times. And Nikhil Hati Singh is watching, wonder what this week will hold for America and the world. And Pradya says, thanks for the shout out. So I think we're ready now, Neil, to bring on our guest. Professor Joseph Mbele is with us. He is a professor of English at St. Olaf College and someone who helps Americans understand Africa and Africans understand America. Americans understand the world. There's so much to discuss. Please welcome Professor Joseph Mbele.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you for being here. We're so delighted to have you. It's an hour earlier for you in St. Olaf. Tell us about your Sunday mornings. Are you a morning person? It's 8 a.m. It's 7:30 a.m. for you out in Minnesota.
Yeah. It's a pleasant day. And it's about 7:40 now. And I'm glad I was able to wake up on time for the show.
We appreciate it very much.
Yeah, I've been working the whole week since the semester started. So I was afraid I might oversleep. I'm glad I was able to come on time.
As you know, students worry a lot about oversleeping. So where are we in the semester? You're almost at spring break?
We still have a few weeks.
Okay.
We started only in February on the 6th. So
Okay.
yeah, we
Yeah.
still have a little bit of time before the spring break.
Yeah, I understand that. And so what I would like to talk to you about all the things that are happening, but I want to just get your take on the week that just passed. What are your thoughts as an observer of the world?
Uh-huh. I need to say, first of all, I am an African, and wherever I am, in this world, I carry my African identity, my African worldview. I see the world, from an African perspective. So while there are certain things which are being reported, like the war in Ukraine and the problems that happened when President Zelensky and President Trump met. As an African, I also think about what's going on in Africa, the troubles in Congo, the danger of regional confrontations. I'm also thinking about what's happening in my own country. I'm still thinking about
Please
what.
tell us a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah,
please
yeah,
tell
yeah.
us a little about what's happening.
Yeah, we are a democratic country, and we have elections every 5 years, and this is election year. We are going to have elections, and so the excitement is already there. As usual, soon there will be campaigns. My problem is I grew up at a time when my country was under the leadership of a very brilliant, very patriotic, very humble person. And he was an international figure, President Julius Nyerere. And I think he was very much in touch with the realities of the country and the world. And he was leading us in a direction, of being champions of justice, liberation, not only in Africa, but around the world. And I think we have somewhat lost some of that. So I'm not very pleased, with the current government or the government that came after his government. I'm one of the older Tanzanians who are very nostalgic, for the good old days of President Nyerere. So we will never be truly happy with whoever comes after that. They cannot measure up to him. So that's the unfortunate part. But the young generations who didn't know Nyerere, they're quite okay with what they see. So my anxiety is about where are we going as a country, We are still, a very, very good country compared to other countries. There's a social harmony. We are many religions. A country of different religions and races and what you call tribes. But we don't have the conflicts that people associate with those identities. We are a unique country in that sense. So I don't worry about those things at all.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, and as far as Congo is concerned, it's been a long-standing problem. They've never known peace. And I remember, was it Neil? Yeah, Neil showed the New York Times, and there was a front page picture of the troubles in Congo. My only wish is that Americans and foreigners in general would know that these are not entirely African problems. They are part of the legacy of colonialism. And Western countries, for example, have a big role to play in the troubles that happen in African countries like Congo. They laid the foundation for these troubles by, first of all, cutting up our continent into colonies, which was a very arbitrary kind of arrangement, completely at variance with the indigenous, social political groupings. So the Westerners should never even try to put the blame entirely on the Africans. They say they sowed the seeds for the troubles in the Congo, and they are benefiting from Africa's rich resources. We are a very rich continent. And I think that will bring us to the point you will be raising later about President Trump and the USAID, because I'll be saying that Africans can actually stand on their own if foreign exploitation stopped.
And so what is your impression of what will happen? What is your prediction of what will happen with these programs being shut down? Marco Rubio said that despite everything that's happening, we're going to be very careful with life-saving programs, with critical programs that affect children. But more than 10,000 programs have been shut instantly. And that's the problem. I believe that every government or business is it's okay to kind of audit them and check how they're doing, double check, verify, but do it in a thoughtful manner. What has happened at USAID is totally unacceptable. So tell us what this means for parts of Africa, for example.
Yeah. Again, if I go back to our founding father, our president, our first president, Julius Nyerere, when we became independent in 1961, he embarked on a policy of self-reliance. He was teaching us to be self-reliant, use our resources for our development and not depend on foreign aid. He was consistently against that idea that we need foreign aid. So we were built as a country that wanted to be self-reliant, and we have the resources. And so, in fact, I've listened to Africans, from different parts of the continent, and they are saying the same thing, that if President Trump, stops sending, what is called aid, it will teach those African governments to really take stock of what we have in our countries and then use it. And we are a rich continent. To give an example, there's the country in West Africa called Burkina Faso,
Yep.
which has cut off, links with France. And it's very clear now that it's owning, and has taken control over its resources, such as gold. It's moving very fast. It has paid off all its foreign debt. It's now using its resources for its own development. And thoughtful Africans are actually saying that. And the other thing is this. I was, as a student in my country, we studied a lot about questions of development. And it was very clear that overall, the wealth of Africa is being taken out. And what comes in as aid is simply a fraction of what's taken out. There's more wealth that we are losing as a continent, than what we are getting, in the form of what's called aid. We are net losers. And so we could actually thrive without what's called foreign aid. The statistics were there. We read the books. We listened to the theorists. The scholars who had done the research. And these are things that are not acknowledged. People have the narrative, believe the narrative that Africa is a poor continent. We are not. We were colonized by European countries precisely because we are very rich in resources. That's the whole rationale of colonialism. And a lot of the struggles over Africa are because we are a rich continent, all the way from South Africa to North Africa. South Africa, for example, and Congo, they're among the richest in the world in terms of minerals, just to give an example. So, however, I think we, at least, let me say, I'm very pleased, like you said earlier, that Mr. Rubio clarified and said that they will continue to assist, in matters of health and critical needs like that. Definitely, this is a good gesture. It helps, the image of the United States. And America has the capacity to connect well with the countries through programs like this. I came to the USA, on a similar program, the Fulbright Scholarship. It was established by Senator William Fulbright. He was a very famous senator. And he thought America can project its power through, friendship and cultural exchanges, not so much through military means. And Fulbright was right. The US has the capacity to make friends and sustain friendships and goodwill around the world. So I support the Trump administration if they want to continue, because they are a rich country anyway, and they can do those things. Again, the US cannot isolate itself from the world. I think it would not be a good idea, but there is a way for the US to be friends with countries. I like the USA very much. I benefited from the Fulbright. I went to a very good graduate school, University of Wisconsin, all paid for by American taxpayers. I end up being very favorably inclined to this country. And I tell my students all the time. In fact, I tease them. I say, you know what? I want you to tweet your grandma and tell her, I am so grateful that it was her tax dollars that made it possible for me to study in this country. They think it's very funny, but I'm very sincere. Do send a tweet to your grandma, or an email message.
Depending on the grandma, that may not be favorably received, because we know
Aha,
that there are a lot of people who have become in this country isolationist, against the use of their tax dollars in for good things. But overall, I'm hearing that you are optimistic, perhaps, that
yeah.
some countries in Africa will not be as adversely affected as others. We have seen some dire numbers being projected. More than 5 million Africans will be pushed into extreme poverty, for example. But you believe that if the resources that are being exploited and taken out were equitably distributed or controlled by these countries, then they would be able to offset the USAID aid that's coming in. That's your belief.
I believe that also. Yeah, I believe that very much. And also, there are many Africans who work abroad, and the remittances, the money they sent back, um, is much more than the amount of money we get as foreign aid. And
Right.
you can
So,
do, yeah, remittances. If you do a search, you'll find there are figures there.
no,
Yeah,
it's billions of dollars that come back from overseas. People who are working overseas from
yeah.
from the continent of Africa, from the continent of Asia, etc. Folks, if you're just joining us, I'm Sree Sreenivasan. That's Professor Joseph Mbele, who was born in Tanzania and is a professor of English at St. Olaf College in Minnesota. And this is the New York Times Read Along. Every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time to 10 a.m. Eastern, we read the New York Times with a fabulous guest, and we take your questions. So we talk about what's happening in the news. We also talk about their career. And this has already been a master class in trying to understand what's happening in Africa and how Africa will be affected by USAID. Now, one of the things that I have seen a lot, Professor Mbele, is this idea that Africa is not a continent. And you have to tell Americans that Africa is, in fact, a varied landscape with many different countries and different political systems, different values, and almost no other continent, I think, is kind of bunched together the way Africa is. Your thoughts?
Yes, you're very right. Africa is a continent, and I hope Americans will someday realize this. I mean, some of them do, but the majority talk about Africa as if it was a little area, a little village. 1 minute, it's a place, plagued by disease. The other minute, it's a violent place. The other minute, it's a jungle. So
to go on safari, yes.
right.
Everybody wants to go on safari
So
there, yeah.
it's a continent more than 2 times the size of the USA. I've not even seen most of it. I've seen only several countries, and there are 54. And as you say, many languages, many cultures, political orientations, economic systems, but overall, a very rich continent.
And one of the points that was made by Dr. Tachi, who was a guest on this show when I was in Miami earlier this year, says that unfortunately, we also participate in the exploitation unintentionally because of our devices, our phones, our computers, laptops, which use cobalt from Congo and minerals from other parts of Africa. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Also, our raw materials. Unfortunately, again, it's a matter of leadership, and I blame the African leaders. We grow a lot of crops, cotton and coffee and cocoa and tea. And in my country, sisal, this. If we could process those in our countries and sell finished products, we would get better value for those crops. As it is, we sell our coffee, to foreign companies. They process the coffee and they add value to the product, and then they sell it. Uh, uh, and we don't even determine the prices. We depend on what's called the world market for our coffee, and we don't even control the world market. We are subject to the vagaries of the world market. So if we could reduce these kinds of imbalances and dependencies and take intentional decisions to build our own factories, processing plants, we would create jobs for our people. We would add value to those crops, and then we would ship cans of coffee instead of raw coffee to Europe, to the US, to places like that. We would make textiles instead of shipping the cotton. Those are decisions that our African governments need to make. They need to invest in those, projects. But some of these African governments, they are wasteful. They spend the money. They actually steal the money. Some of them. And you find African dictators who are very, very rich. They've put their money away in foreign banks. They buy, property, in Europe, in the US. It's a problem of leadership.
Sure. Here's a note from Apollo that echoes many of the things you're talking about. The African continent is a net creditor to the global economy. African peoples add more than they take. Given the media bias, you would not know this from the man-made crises in many nations. So this is a point you have also made, and really important for everyone to understand that this is happening right now. Apollo says that the shuttering of USAID may allow Africans in various countries to become self-reliant. Local agriculture markets are negatively impacted by the importation dumping of surplus agriculture product from the US. I think that that is directionally right, and we hope that'll happen. But in the immediate short term, there will definitely be issues around food and aid that people need. And we are seeing various questions coming in from our audience, so we'll try to ask you some, Professor, as we go. Mary C. Curtis, a dear friend and former guest on the show multiple times, says it's disturbing that Secretary of State Marco Rubio skipping the G20 summit in South Africa, a major U.S. trading partner, is calling its policies anti-American and DEI. We also have seen Trump say he's going to stop all refugees except Afrikaner refugees, white refugees from South Africa. Can you just put some of this into context for us so that people understand? Thank you.
All my friends here in America, all my students know as I said here at the very beginning, I carry my African identity wherever I go, my African mindset. And I should also say, I'm not a citizen of the USA. And so there are certain things I just leave to the Americans out of respect. I don't comment on American politics as such, except in the rare cases where, American politics directly affects, say, Africa or my country. So as far as decisions of, the US government involving, affairs of this country, I just wish the country well. That's what I tell my students. I wish you guys well. In terms of DEI, I have my own view. I have my own view. I have a lot of misgivings about, things that are done in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've always believed that when it comes to issues such as hiring people, the criterion, the standard should always be competence. Always. As far as hiring people, positions, they should be based on just competence, experience. Unfortunately, historically, that principle has been violated. There's been favoritism, people being hired because, they are of a certain race. And, I don't believe in that, and it shouldn't be considered at all. However, if we are talking about addressing, historic injustices, then it should be at the level of education. Equip the schools, all the schools, give them proper teachers, proper resources, so that everybody has an equal opportunity to get a good education. That should be the emphasis. At some point in the future, the skills of everybody will be developed, to the level where they can now compete equally, favorably in the marketplace. So in terms of hiring, I don't relent. It should always be competence. Always competence and experience and qualification at the level of hiring, whether you're hiring pilots or teachers or nurses or doctors or administrators. If people have been left behind historically, the campaign should be to provide education and equip those people. And there should be no discrimination, no favoritism because you are white, you get the job, or because you are black, you get the job. No. I don't believe in those things.
I hear you. I will say that we have seen in the name of shutting down all of DEI that the Trump administration took the most important position in the US military, which is held by a Black American, and replaced him with a less qualified white man because he was white. And that's an example of where people talk about DEI, but then get it all mixed up as we're seeing now. So there are lots of very disturbing things happening at the moment. And Neil, I think, has a comment as well.
Yes, Professor Mbele, thank you for those comments. And I think that in general, that's something that we strive for, right? And this goes back to Dr. King. We want people to judge not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And it certainly goes both ways. I think you did mention it, though, toward the end of your comments. The context here, I think, is important, right? The historical context in the United States, in America, where people did not have the same opportunities, where after slavery and then through the period up till the civil rights movement, everything from redlining to other policies that were put in place, there's so many ways in which the government made it impossible for people to get an equal and fair shake as far as employment, education, housing, etc. We focused a lot about this with the 1619 project. So I think if for people who are familiar with DEI programs and kind of how they work, I think the idea is certainly to open up those opportunities. For example, advertising in other publications or reaching out to communities, so you don't have a homogeneous workforce. It is a question of kind of leveling the playing field so that people, regardless of their background, if they have the skills, can get the job. I think it's important.
Yeah. And some comments coming in. Let's just show them on screen here. Deborah Kerr says content of character, but also not shut out women if qualified. And Dr. Tachi says, because of lack of opportunities, people of African descent in the US have had to over prepare themselves and actually end up overqualified, only to be passed up when it comes to hiring. We've seen that many, many times in that as well. And here's a comment from Diana, who lived in Goma. By the way, she's also up at 6 a.m. or earlier in California. Africa changed how I look at life. I saw the stark differences between rich and poor, happiness and sadness, insecurity and safety, kindness and cruelty. I'm forever grateful to Africa for opening my eyes to the experience of those of us living outside the USA. So there's so many different things we're going to cover, and so many interesting comments coming in as well. So what I'd like to do, Professor, is to hear a little bit about your work with folklore, and talk a little bit about that and how why folklore is relevant in today's world.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to have this opportunity. First of all, for those who might not know, folklore is really a term that covers or describes the totality of traditions, stories and songs and beliefs and customs and jokes, all kinds of things like that are passed on from generation to generation, informally. It's normally by word of mouth. You hear these stories, you hear these jokes, you hear these rumors, you learn these practices, customs, beliefs from your grandma, from your parent, from your older sister, and they're just passed on. That's folklore. Now, my own attention has been to the things that we pass on by word of mouth, stories and songs and rumors and jokes and proverbs, and they are very central in human life, and these have been there from the beginning of time. Humans, started telling stories basically from the very moment they learned language. And that's a big thing. We can talk about it forever. The value of folklore, if you take the stories, for example, traditional stories, folk tales, for example, is that they embody, they preserve, and they transmit traditional understandings of life and the values and the relationships and the sense of what's good and bad. They embody reflections on the meaning of life. So there are an entire system of knowledge, philosophy, and understanding, and we are talking about the way things were, before writing. All this, as I said earlier, were passed on, by word of mouth. There were no books, no libraries. And many cultures around the world, they still live that way. They don't, read, they don't write. Their languages are not even written. That includes my mother tongue, Matengo. Most languages in the world are not written. People should know that. So they pass on knowledge, by means of these stories and songs and sayings. And as I've said, it's a way of really passing on the education, the understanding of all kinds of things. So that's why I'm so, focused on folklore. That's why I value it so much. And as I said at the beginning, I'm an African, I carry my identity, my mindset wherever I go. And I speak for my continent, I celebrate my heritage. So here is my idea. When we Africans, for example, start a college, or run a college, and we have, say, a department of philosophy, it saddens me. It saddens me. You go into an African department of philosophy, and all they do is study, the Greeks, Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, the European philosophers. If I were in charge, I would start, first of all, by having the students study a lot of the African stories and the proverbs and the songs, because they embody, the entire way of thinking, the thoughts that, our ancestors developed about all kinds of things. That should be the foundation. And after the students have grasped that, after they're very conversant with that heritage, then they move out and look at, the European traditions, the Oriental traditions. So that's really, in summary, what I would say about folklore.
That's great. So happy to hear about that work and the importance of thinking about that in context. Folks, we have about 45 minutes left with Professor Mbele. Please ask questions and we will come to them. And we'll also look at the newspaper in just a moment. There's Matengo Folktales. This is one of the books that we were discussing. And Sudha Parekh says, in India, we have a lot of interesting and effective folklores during independence movement. She talks about Zaverchand Magani wrote and sang a lot of folk tales and folklores. And India is a country with a big oral tradition, as you know. And you have spent time in India. Please talk about that.
Yeah, I'm glad somebody mentioned that, because in my teaching of folklore, I talk about the Indian heritage, for example. And so everything from the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the great foundation of Indian folklore and literature and art and philosophy and religion, So yeah, India, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, absolutely. And then, all the other things that have been said and, recorded and translated. There are a lot of folk tales. I teach some of them. I have books of Indian folk tales right here at my office. I didn't know we were getting into this. I would have pulled them out so I could show them. Yes, and a lot of the writers, Indian writers, like writers all over the world, they have very much utilized that tradition. They've appropriated, the folklore. So you read works such as those of R.K. Narayan, a very famous Indian writer, R.K. Narayan, he wrote stories like, uh, the Guide, the Bachelor of Arts, and, um, um, he was there from the 1930s, alongside writers like Raja Rao and Mulk Raj Anand. So I teach those writers, but as a folklorist, I always see the way they appropriate, the folklore heritage. That's some of the stuff I can say about India.
And tell us about the year you spent, or a month you spent there, yeah?
I was in Hyderabad. I won a grant. The U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, put out an announcement, inviting people from all over the world to write proposals for a grant to do research in India. And so I knew that Hyderabad, there's a Osmania University in Hyderabad, and there was the American Studies Research Center in Hyderabad at Osmania University, American Studies Research Center. So I wrote my proposal. Guess what? And I wanted to go study African American folklore as exemplified in the work of a very famous African American writer, Zora Neale Hurston. She was there in the 1920s, 1930s, a very famous African American folklorist. So I wrote the proposal, I got accepted, and off I went. I spent a month in Hyderabad. It was an amazing experience. I got to learn about the culture. I got to learn about the people. They invited me into their homes, and I got to experience hospitality of the Indians. And I've been talking about this everywhere I go. And I got invited into the temples, the Hindu temples. Imagine, I'm a Catholic, and I was invited to just visit those temples. And I learned how, you enter a Hindu temple, like there's a little bell, you ring at the entrance. It was quite a touching experience. I have photographs of myself sitting in the temple, and around me, you have statues of the gods and the goddesses, Vishnu and Ram, what's the
Rama, Brahma, Shiva, yeah, lots of different
Hanuman,
gods. Yeah,
Hanuman,
yeah, sure.
exactly. Uh-huh. Exactly. So I have these fond memories, and when I came back to the USA, in fact, it was just before I came to teach in the US. I bought many books in India, so when I came to the USA to start courses in post-colonial literature, I had a whole bunch of Indian books I had bought in Hyderabad, and I used those ones. I have those copies right here in my office, printed
Lovely.
by the Indian publishers. And you know how they have their own paper. The paper, is different. The covers, the quality of the paper is different. There's so much, for me, in those possessions that I have here. There's nostalgia for India, and I always tell people I want to go back. India is a fascinating place, and the hospitality, for example, you go into into Indians' home, they have tons and tons of food, and then you will eat and you will eat, and you say, I'm full, thank you. They don't get it. So
They don't care. Yeah.
the lady of the house will fill your plate even more. So it was this kind. Sometimes we didn't even speak the same language. I went into a home where the wife doesn't speak a word of English, but through gestures we were able to communicate. I would say thank you for the food, I would do whatever I took, but she wouldn't get it. She put more food on my plate. I mean, it was a touching experience I had in India. I could talk about it the whole day.
Yeah, so we don't have all day. We have, 30 more minutes.
Yeah.
Dr. Chachi asks, what role does folklore play in post-colonial storytelling and life in various countries? And Makran is asking about the trend in storytelling. There's, in the US, we talk about storytelling. Companies are doing storytelling. Politicians are doing storytelling. So if you can combine your answer into those, and then we will look at the newspaper and talk about that as well. So
folklore never disappears. Folklore never dies. Although some people will say, oh, we Americans, we have lost our folklore. No, it never dies. It changes. There are different forms that come in, and it's also disseminated in different ways. For example, when humans invented writing, it created the possibility now of folklore being transmitted, in printed form. That's how here in the US, we can read Indian folklore, Chinese folklore, because somebody published them and we get them as books. when we invented the film, it's not possible to disseminate folklore, in the form of these films. And so you have Disney, they create or recreate stories, traditional stories like Cinderella, uh, Beauty and the Beast, and things like that. In terms of literature, as I've said already, we have writers, in Africa, in the USA, in India, China, who base their stories or who are inspired by, the themes, the patterns, the characters coming from folklore. You look at Mark Twain in America, for example. Mark Twain, the great writer Mark Twain, or Huckleberry Finn, that novel, Huckleberry Finn. You look at French writers, you look at, Chinese writers, African writers like Chinua Achebe. So the tradition persists. And then we have cities nowadays, people living in cities. They're not, more and more are moving out of the rural places. They have their own folklore in the cities. We call this, for example, urban legends. It's a big form of folklore, that is there in contemporary times. Urban legends, massive amounts of stories, rumors, based on people's lives in cities. And again, we could spend a lot of time, talking about examples. And again, these are universal. Whether you live in Hyderabad or in New York or in Dar es Salaam, there are stories which arise from that experience of being in the cities. So folklore never dies. Folklore is part of our lives, and folklore will always be there. New technologies, new means of communication simply provide, the folklore new avenues, for transmission and all that.
And in terms of the way that storytelling is now permeating everything we're doing, do you think that's going to continue and is going to be important at a time when whoever tells the best story gets to drive the narrative, so to speak?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I said earlier, wherever I go, I'm an African, I carry my African identity. And what we have been doing here on this program is storytelling. And through these stories, we build alliances or we break alliances, we start wars, because a country will talk about another country, demonize that country, demonize those people. A leader will come to the USA, the media will tell stories about that leader and their politics, turn the Americans, in favor of that leader or against. It's all about stories. We will hate a country,
Yep.
we will go to war. It's stories and stories and stories. They connect us. And as I said, as an African, I see the world from an African point of view, and I want to project the African story about those events.
And you've done that so beautifully. I'm so glad to be talking to you about this, folks. That's Professor Joseph Mbele from St. Olaf College in Minnesota. I'm Sree Sreenivasan. This is the New York Times Read Along, hosted by Digimentors and Scroll.in and Scroll Global. And we are about to go to the New York Times and read it and talk about the news there. Apollo says that he has spent time in India as well, and whenever he smells burning wood, I'm nostalgic and promise myself to go back to India. And the way in which you spoke so lovingly about India reminds me of a very important project called the Blindian Project, about Black and brown connections that are made in love, in life, in business, all of those great things. Blindian-project.com, and that's our friend Jonah who runs it. If you haven't seen it, it really emphasizes the solidarity of Black and brown communities and this hub of Black and brown culture. So everyone should check that out. And Professor, if you haven't seen this, I hope you will look at it as well. Blindian-project.com. So please do check
It's
that
very
out
fascinating.
when you can. Yeah,
It's very fascinating.
I'm sure you would love that.
Yeah, I'll follow it up.
Yeah. So what we're going to do now, folks, is look at the New York Times and get the professor's thoughts on the paper as we're going through it at the same time. So he will be able to tell us what are the things, if there's anything that he wants to reflect on, he is welcome to jump in. But I'm just going to go through the paper. This is the front page of today's New York Times. I'll just once again to show you yesterday's New York Times. Trump and Vance scold Zelensky and blow up was that headline. By the way, story I had not seen earlier. A crypto scandal ensnares Argentina's president, who many of you know is like a mini Trump. He basically promoted a crypto coin that lost $250 million and thousands of people lost their savings. This was a classic pump and dump kind of scheme. And then Donald Trump has done the same thing. He has benefited and gotten more than $2 billion, he and his associates, of the cryptocurrency that he has promoted since he has become president. The family got $100 million in just the currency fees alone. And this is something we don't talk about enough. Here's the front page of today's paper, a big story about the origins of how Musk got on his way to doing all the things he's doing with Doge. A story here, a picture here on the third anniversary of the Ukraine war, sheltering amid rubble after Russian bombing, and the Allies' blow up could intensify Putin's attacks. And so you're seeing that on the front page. And undoing years of climate policy in a few weeks, his moves strain limits of his power. We will see if the government, if the judges are able to do anything to make a difference. And Canada strives to stop migrants entering the US. More are fleeing the US for Canada. So there's a U-turn in migration, as you see here. And an Oscar nominee rouses Brazil's junta victims. This is about a Best Picture nominee, I'm Still Here, about the murder of a Brazilian congressman by the country's military dictatorship. This is
Yeah,
a
can I
very
say,
important, please go ahead.
yeah, just a word about people fleeing the USA. It sounds very dramatic.
Mhm.
Yeah. It sounds very dramatic. People getting out of the US, going to other countries. Uh, Now, as an African, as a Tanzanian, in fact, as an African, um, I don't see this as very dramatic because, as I said earlier, when we became independent, our country, stood out as a supporter of liberation movements, championing, those people who are fighting oppression in their countries. We received people from many parts of the world who were running away from their countries, people, including people from the United States. There was a big problems here with the Black Panthers, those Black Americans. Many of them, ran out of the US and they came to my country. Some are still there. And then when African countries, were fighting for independence, like in Southern Africa, we received refugees, from a lot of these countries, hundreds and hundreds of thousands. But the idea of people coming out of the US, going to other countries is not new. Right now, as we are talking, there are many African Americans who are quitting the US forever, going to live in other countries, African countries like Senegal, Ghana, Gambia, Rwanda, Tanzania, South Africa. So Americans should not be too surprised. They should look at this in the broader context. It's not something that's happening only now because of, say, President Trump.
And so that's interesting background for people to know for sure. I'm just flipping through the paper here. Here's an unusual ad. Speaking of Africa, here's an ad for Casablanca, the movie, set, of course, in Morocco. There's an ad of movie posters being auctioned that I just discovered. When you read the newspaper, it's not just about the stories. It's also interesting to look at the ads. There are now political ads directly addressed to President Trump and Congress folks. Here is somebody named Mike Fernandez who has taken out a full-page ad saying "God bless America," and he's blaming he's saying the U.S. administration has abandoned the Trump administration has abandoned the cause of freedom, There's another ad here for also, this is a plea to Donald Trump to resign. So imagine, I've never heard of Grant Grissom. I don't know who he is, but Trump time to resign at gmail.com. Imagine spending the energy and the time and the money more than everything else. This is probably $70,000 or some crazy number like that for a full page ad in the New York Times, that he's doing this. All these people are doing this. It's so interesting. Let's see, what are the other stories here? On lawless Asian border, outposts of global scam thrive at online fraud. And this is a story from Myanmar and what is happening there. National stories at gun stores, accessories, and lifestyle gear are driving sales. Retailers take cue from fashion brands and connecting guns and fashion brands. Here's the International Rescue Committee, which does a lot of work in Africa. They're talking about raising money to help uh, fill the gap of US aid that is not coming in. So many interesting stories here. Musk and congressional Republicans threaten judges with impeachment. Mass firing of federal staff that may imperil food supply, cattle, and pets. With everything that's going on, you can just imagine what damage is being done. We had a nice comment earlier from Nikhil Hati saying that this is such an insightful conversation. Thank you, Professor, for that. That really tells you we're making a connection. Deborah Kerr says that Argentina, thanks to mini Trump, has withdrawn from the WHO. I cannot think of a worse time for America not to be in WHO when there is so much danger to the world health situation. And that's one of the things we are seeing as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because as I said, it's important for America to know it needs the world. It doesn't produce everything, and for peace in the world, we need to build mutual understanding and friendships and the collaboration. That one danger in one part of the world is actually danger to other parts of the world. It's a global village we're dealing with. So, yeah.
Yeah, here's Pragya saying that that ad we were discussing was paid for by philanthropic support, and Dr. Tachi says, "Wow, the money involved for full page ad shows the seriousness of the issues we face. Will it have an effect? Who knows?" And Deborah says that you made a good point. Migration has happened for decades globally and for many reasons. Anyone who sees the story about Afrikaner refugees to the US, that is white people who want to move to the US, keep in mind that South Africa's the white people are 7% of South Africa's population. They own 70% of the land today. The usable land today is owned 70% is owned by white people. So that gives you a sense of the issues still happening in Africa. His carpets are Oscar worthy. This is about the guy who provides the correct red carpet in for the Oscars. Are you going to be watching the Oscars? Have you seen any of the Oscar movies?
Not really. I am
Okay.
too occupied with my folklore and teaching, and I don't watch many of these things really, unfortunately.
Okay.
Maybe I should
Okay.
start watching.
You don't have time,
Sree,
clearly. Neil, go ahead.
Sree,
Yeah.
I want to give a quick shout out. That article that you just referenced, the Oscar-worthy, the red carpets. Who makes the red carpet? Was written by Sarah Barr, who was a guest on our show in December. So I want to encourage folks to follow her on social media. Of all the guests that we've had, Sree, who are New York Times writers, she does the best job of sharing her work. She always gets a image of her article, the layout of the article in the paper, and puts it on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. So she's definitely worth following. And I'll share her information in the Facebook chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Jonathan says, I haven't watched the Oscars in decades. So you've got good company there, Professor. This is yeah. Deborah says, with the measles crisis in Texas and outbreak in Kansas, I worry that with travel, Americans traveling this summer, especially with children who may not be properly vaccinated, may help with the spread. And Elon Musk said, I mean, not Elon Musk, RFK Jr., I'm sorry, said that this is it is not unusual to have this kind of measles outbreak, and in fact it is, and it's something that's very worrying. The Sunday business cover is so based, much wow, so cringe. Elon Musk uses online slang to marshal his 200 million social media followers, but he might be reaching his limits. That's kind of interesting. Even though the ceiling is so high, he might be reaching his limits. Hot selling SUVs look like trucks again. Car-like curves were in, but now buyers pursue right angles and off-road cred. And so this is the business cover. The opinion is last call for horse racing. Why are we paying billions for a sport that fans have lost interest in? So very interesting question about horse racing and its role in the world. The editorial board has written an essay. If only the powerful are free to speak their minds, the nation doesn't have free speech. And that's also an interesting angle to everything we are talking about. And how do people tell their story? Trump is rootin' for Putin is Maureen Dowd's column. And the bewildering irony behind the Trump-Musk partnership, a president who talks a lot about his own power seems almost eager to share it. And
Can I say,
that's
can I say a word
yeah,
about Putin again? About Putin?
sure,
Uh,
please.
yeah, that's the story, and we have been talking about narratives and people telling their own stories. And if you go around Africa, what they remember about Putin, what they know about Putin, is quite different from what you have here in the USA. I remember photographs of Putin, in those days of the liberation struggle in Southern Africa, Putin alongside leaders of the liberation movements. Russia was a supporter of South African liberation movements. So Africans tend to have a very favorable view of Putin because of the history we had with the Soviet Union. It has not disappeared. So I just wanted to share this, here in the US, you hear narrative about Putin, but from an African point of view, if you read African newspapers or talk to Africans, you will hear a different story. I don't want to make any judgments. I just wanted to report this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's obviously something that has happened, and people have noticed that in many countries it's like that. Instead of resisting, Democrats should stay quiet, says James Carville, the Democratic strategist who's always in the news. He says, our party can't stop Trump legitimately, so we need a tactical pause in our fight for the future. Here's something about the movie. I loved Honora, but I still hope it loses at the Oscars. The film's award nominations have been touted as a nationalist victory in Russia. So there's a Russian oligarch's son involved in this, but I don't know enough about it. Why is the world's richest man sleeping on the floor? Take the weekend off already, Elon. This is someone advocating for people taking the weekend off, taking time off. And Elon famously sleeps on the floor when he is going full tilt, as he is now. It's dangerous, it's unpopular, and we're paying billions to keep it alive. This is Noah Shackman's piece. He was former editor in chief of Rolling Stone and the Daily Beast, and a multi-billion-dollar inverted pyramid of government-sponsored vice. So that's a interesting story. There are, of course, great defenders of horse racing. I teach at Harvard. Store managers see me as a threat. And this was an important piece that I read earlier by Reginald Dwayne Betts, a poet, lawyer, and founder and chief executive of Freedom Reads. No matter how fast I pedal, I can never leave some things behind. We all know, Professor, examples of folks who are treated with suspicion when they go into stores just because they're African American or Black.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why you too need a nemesis? Athletes, pop stars, presidents, many successful people grasp a grudge's power. Interesting. So that's another way of storytelling, that you use your enemy to to do whatever, to as a motivational opportunity.
Yeah.
The Oscars veer to hail weird. Please go ahead.
Yeah. In fact, the thing you just said about people being watched, with suspicion because of the color of their skin, again, from a folklorist's point of view, that's one of the things, I was talking about. Stories and stories and stories. If you have all these stories and rumors and stereotypes which are passed on from generation to generation about Black people, naturally, you know, if you have been hearing these stories and you are not Black, you will look at them, with suspicion. Similarly, if you are, a Black person and you have heard all these negative stories about white people, of course, you will see them again with a lot of suspicion and fear. It's all about stories again. So the person who asked about whether folklore is still there or what it's doing in our lives, that's a typical example of it. And folklore has caused or contributed to mass riots, for example. Riots, if you read the stories of riots, even in the USA, you know, uh, you'll find much of the time they are fueled by stories that people hear or rumors. A rumor can start a big riot because it feeds into this whole tradition of beliefs and stereotypes, you know. So the power of folklore is there and it's huge and we cannot ignore it.
And January 6th happened because the president told a story of the election being stolen and people believed him, and that's why they
Exactly.
ended up there. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, the people, the Haitians, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats.
Yes, eating that. Yes.
And you can imagine the
Yes.
impact of that.
I was
Yeah, if
gonna
he had said Norwegian, people would not have immediately jumped on, but he said Haitians for a particular reason. That's why he
Yeah,
said that.
yeah.
Neil.
I was going to jump in with two other examples. I mean, Professor Mbele, I think that's actually really good. I mean, you can apply this idea of storytelling in so many places.
Yes.
Obviously in politics, where people are telling stories about government waste and abuse, and that's
Exactly.
why Elon Musk and Doge are doing what they're doing. But Emmett Till, if you go back to the civil rights movement, that was a story
Mhm.
that was told.
Yeah.
The Tulsa massacre, it was based on a story that led to this horrific attack and just wiping out Black Wall Street. I mean, so history, Native Americans. I mean, I think it goes on and on.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. Absolutely.
And I teach those things in my folklore class. We talk about the devastating consequences of a rumor, for example. And
Yes.
rumor is part of folklore, as I said. We cannot ignore folklore. We live with it, we depend on it, we act according to it. It can be very irrational, but it has real influence in our lives.
Absolutely.
So here is we're almost out of time. We're almost done. Just want to look at the book review cover. Is the long view in his new book. Omar El Akkad considers and condemns the Western remorse response to Gaza's suffering. And this week we saw the Trump Gaza video that was shared by the president. Very upsetting video that we all saw. The New York Times Magazine cover is Parker Posey Does What She Wants by Amanda Hess. I'm sorry to say I don't know who Parker Posey is. I presume she's an actress, but this tells you that, Professor, I'm also out of touch with the world of Hollywood, unfortunately. So this is these are some of the stories that we're looking at, and Conan O'Brien is hosting the Oscars this year, tonight, in fact, and then Manola Dargis, who is the one of the film critics at the Times, is writing about Gene Hackman, the actor who was very sadly found dead with his wife and a dog nearby. They've been probably dead for nine days, is what has been said, and we don't know what the full story is and what exactly happened with with Gene Hackman, but Gene Hackman was a fantastic actor. I remember first seeing him in Superman, the first Superman movie, and he played a very good villain in Lex Luthor, and he did that very, very well. But he was 95 years old, and he's been the mystery behind this means, as we've been hearing from Professor Mbele, a lot of rumors, conspiracy theories, all kinds of things are happening right now. Whenever there's a void, whatever stories people tell will fill that void. And we're seeing that, Professor, in misinformation, disinformation around the world and affecting politics as well. Since you're from Tanzania, I wanted to just tell the world one quick story about why I want to visit Tanzania in the form what was formerly Zanzibar, is the home of the home where Freddie Mercury was born, in Stone Town, in Zanzibar, and now in Tanzania. And most Americans don't know that Freddie Mercury is of Indian origin, of Zoroastrian Parsi origin, born in Africa, lived in India, lived in the UK, and just an amazing story of his family. So you have been there, I believe.
Oh yeah, I've been to Zanzibar many times. I have been to the big house, which is now like a museum, right there in Zanzibar, and his name is written there prominently. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to. I would love to visit it in Stone Town, Tanzania. Is where you would have to go to visit Freddie Mercury's birthplace, and there you can
Yes.
see a picture of Freddie there as well. So we're just going to read through some quick comments. Professor, we're going to give you a moment to catch your breath. Neil and I are going to chat for a moment, and then we're going to bring you back to give us some final thoughts for Americans who are trying to understand Africa as a continent. What are some things that we should be keeping in mind? We would love to hear that. So we'll just take you off camera for a couple of minutes, and I will bring Neil on. And thank you, Professor. And Neil, welcome back. What a great show. I learned a lot, and it was great to be back here, in fact, and be with you on this show. You have something great going on this week. Speaking of African American history, so you will be missing this show for the first time probably in many years.
Absolutely, and it's a strange feeling to be doing that. But I have the incredible honor and privilege. Folks might remember we had Deetra Everson as a guest in February. She's the CEO of the John and Lillian Miles Lewis Foundation, and it's been an incredible pleasure to work with them. I'm going to be going down to Selma, Alabama in next week. We are installing 2 plaques at the edge of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. If folks recall and know the story, this is where there was a march from Selma to Montgomery, and John Lewis was famously beaten by the cops to within an inch of his life. And we will be installing plaques to tell the story of what happened there. And I'll be with the team installing these plaques. We have one of the civil rights leaders, Reverend Bernard Lafayette, will be speaking there. We'll be hearing from foot soldiers, people who actually participated in the march, which is incredible. And so I am thrilled to be down there. And this is the picture, the famous picture of John Lewis facing off against the police in 1965. It's the 60th anniversary of that march. So it's just incredible.
I'm so grateful that you get to go, and a little jealous that you're there, Neil, at this very important historic moment. Thank you for all the work that you and Digimentors have been doing with our friends in
Absolutely.
multiple civil rights and social justice organizations. Apollo mentions that the fear people have of African Americans is informed by racist portrayals around the world. The African American civil rights movement was an expression of love for people around the world. Beautifully put. So
Absolutely.
Neil, we have an important show coming up next week. I'll just tell folks that we are going to be meeting Manisha Bharti, who is the CEO of Pratham USA. And Pratham is an incredible organization doing work raising money in the US for India, in education in India, but they also do a lot of work in Africa. And this is all part of the effort to promote India Giving Day on March 14th, 2025. Think about it as Giving Tuesday, but just for giving to India. And a coalition of organizations and the India Philanthropy Alliance will come together. And Manisha is promoting that. And we are very excited to have her with us on Sunday, March 9th. And don't forget, on March 13th, Neil and Don will be hosting another great episode of Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health, this time with Pradnya Haldipur, who's been watching the show, managing mental health while being effective at work. I like, Neil, that you're very clear that it's about being effective at work. It's as opposed to just kind of just surviving
Well,
at work. So everybody, please
I'll
turn
share
out and turn up for that. Yeah.
for that episode in particular, and I think the framing is important. But we're going to be looking at it from two different perspectives. Pradnya is going to share some of her experience in terms of managing through mental health as an individual, but we're also going to talk about what employers and supervisors can do to create a supportive environment for people. Things have changed over the last several years. And there's some things that employers can do to normalize that conversation, to take it seriously. When people, she in a prep call, she made the equivalent. You know, if someone is suffering from depression or extreme anxiety and can't go to work, can't deal with their job at that moment, it should be similar to the idea of, like, if you have a gaping head wound, no one would expect you to actually work and go to your job. Um, Having a major depressive episode should be treated in the same way. So looking forward to that conversation. We've been, and I want to say, Sree, because I say this on the show a lot, and I say it when we talk about it on the read along. I've been co-hosting and producing that show for about a year now. We're at our 25th episode. So thankful that Digimentors is giving me the time and the space to do this, to host this conversation, to try and normalize the conversation around mental health. So many people watching today, Apollo in particular, Pradnya, Jonathan, have watched those episodes and commented. And I know that it's helped people. And in particular, a lot of people have shared their own story about challenges with mental health for the first time on our show. Melissa Lutke shared her experience with clinical depression for the first time in 30 years because we were hosting the show, and she found a safe space to do that. So thank you so much for all the support you've given me personally to do this work.
Thank you, Neil. And to everyone who hasn't watched his show, this is an important conversation that doesn't happen enough, and especially men don't talk about it enough. And Neil has been a leader in talking about this. So please tell your friends to watch. There's an archive of 25 episodes, and they should definitely catch that. So we're now going to bring back Professor Joseph Mbele to just say goodbye and to thank him for being on the show with us. And he is a professor of English in St. Olaf College in Minnesota. And he has been talking to us about his work, observing the world, explaining Africa to Americans, Americans to Africa, and also trying to explain the role of folklore and storytelling and folk tales in today's world. So let's have Professor Mbele with us. And thank you very much, Professor, for being here. Over to you for some final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you have learned, I'm a Tanzanian. I live here in the US. I'm teaching here. I am very much involved in helping Americans to understand Africans in terms of the culture, to help Africans understand Americans. They all enjoy my work and I enjoy their responses. I've published some books which they really love. Visit my website. I hope they will be able to find the links, if they follow up this conversation. I'm so proud of what I'm doing. I enjoy Americans. I like their culture. I like my own culture. And I just want everybody to be in the position I am in, where you understand cultures and then you really get to see them for what they are, and you get to enjoy them. It's a great world we live in. I'm very optimistic that we will eventually become really a global village where everybody, enjoys the variety of cultures. That's all I can say. Follow me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, those types of things.
Yes, we should also very quickly mention your work with AfriConnection, which is your consultancy, which helps people understand Africa. We help Africans and Americans navigate cultural differences, and it's called AfriConnection. We'll just go to the homepage here so everyone can see it. AfriConnection is the name, and everyone should check this out. Lots of great information available there. And congrats on doing that for 30 years, Professor.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot.
Thank you. We all learned a lot as well. And great comments coming in. Diana says, thank you for an interesting show. Thank you for the appearance. Professor Mbele, beautiful city, Northfield, Minnesota. Informative show. And appreciate the show today, and Professor educating us. Kaveri says, such important work you do, Neil. Great show as always. Professor Mbele, thank you. And thank you so much, Professor Mbele, Sree, and Neil. With that, I'm going to end the show, and thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.